Have you ever noticed how the strangest things can feel perfectly ordinary until years later, when you look back and realize just how odd it all was? The 1980s were full of that kind of magic. Big hair sprayed into shapes that defied gravity. Neon clothes so bright they seemed to glow in the dark. Toys that snapped, jingled, or smelled like fruit salad when you scratched them. Waterbeds that sloshed like tiny oceans every time you rolled over. And televisions with rabbit ear antennas that demanded you stand just so, frozen in place, like a human satellite. Back then, none of it seemed unusual. It was just everyday life. But now, when we close our eyes and remember, it all feels wonderfully strange, like a dream you can't quite believe you lived through. Welcome back to Sleepy Town Radio, where we tell quiet stories for quiet hearts. Stories meant to ease you into rest while stirring the softer corners of memory. Tonight, we'll drift through some of the funny, peculiar, and beloved things that defined growing up in the 1980s. These were the little details, the fashions, the fads, the sounds and smells that made a decade unforgettable. And as we wander through them together, I invite you to settle in. Let the memories wash over you, like the gentle static of an old TV set in a darkened living room. You may smile, you may laugh softly, or you may simply sink into the comfort of knowing that life once moved at a different pace, stranger perhaps, but simpler too. So let us begin with a look at the towering hairstyles of the era and the clouds of hairspray that floated through every school hallway. In the 1980s, hair was not just hair. It was a statement, a spectacle, a daily battle between gravity and determination. And for a whole generation, it was one of the most unforgettable parts of growing up. Imagine a bathroom in a suburban house on a weekday morning. The mirror is fogged just slightly from the shower, and lined across the sink are cans of Aquanet and bottles of mousse in neon lettering. A teasing comb waits beside the curling iron, its cord heating up against the counter. The smell of aerosol hangs in the air, sharp, unmistakable, and strangely comforting. For teenagers then, this was more than a routine. It was ritual. Each strand was lifted, teased, sprayed, and coaxed into a shape that almost defied the laws of physics. Ponytails reached for the sky, bangs curled high enough to cast their own shadows. Some mornings, the bathroom looked less like a place to get ready and more like a construction site. Tools in hand, arms raised, building a sculpture that had to last through school, sports, and maybe even a night at the roller rink. There was a saying back then, whispered with pride. The bigger the hair, the closer to cool. And there was truth in it. In hallways lined with lockers, popularity was sometimes measured not in grades or clothes, but in the height of one's bangs. A flat, lifeless head was a kind of social misstep, a silent mark that you hadn't tried hard enough. Looking back now, it seems almost absurd. But in the moment, nothing felt more important than making sure every strand stayed in place. A cloud of hairspray froze your style into a helmet that could withstand wind, humidity, or the occasional brush of a hand. Photographs from the era show classrooms filled with silhouettes that seemed more like crowns than hairstyles. Mile-high ponytails, cascading curls, blonde waves puffed out wide as wings. It wasn't just vanity. It was identity. To stand in front of the mirror and see yourself transformed, taller, louder, bolder, was to feel a little braver in a world that often felt overwhelming. And though some kids laughed at the sheer ridiculousness of it all, others wore their hair like armor, as if those extra inches gave them permission to be seen. Every memory of those mornings carries a sound. The sharp hiss of aerosol spraying into the air, the quiet crackle of the curling iron heating, the soft thump of a brush against the counter. Bedrooms and bathrooms smelled faintly of chemicals, a scent that clung to jackets and sweaters, and sometimes even to the pages of yearbooks. For a while, it was the fragrance of youth itself. Of course, not every attempt was perfect. Some mornings ended with bangs singed by an iron that was too hot, or hair so stiff it crunched when you touched it. A misstep could leave dents that lasted the whole day, and the laughter of friends was both cruel and kind. Yet, even then, it was worth it. Because when someone looked at you and said, "Your hair looks totally rad," it was like being crowned king or queen for the day. Time has softened those memories. Today, people laugh at the photos, shaking their heads at how over the top it all seemed. And yet, there's tenderness in that laughter. Those towering hairstyles were more than fashion. They were proof of effort, of care, of mornings spent trying to belong, to stand out, or simply to feel confident for a few fleeting hours. Somewhere in an old shoebox, a class portrait still waits. Rows of smiling faces, each one framed by clouds of hair sprayed into impossible shapes. And though the styles have faded, the memory lingers. A decade when hair was sculpture, Hairspray was glue, and Vanity, more often than not, was a kind of courage. And with that, the story drifts forward, out of the bathroom mirror and into the buzzing neon halls of another 1980s landmark, the food courts of the mall, where teenagers found freedom in slices of pizza and endless refills of soda. There was a time when freedom didn't mean a driver's license or a car of your own. It simply meant being dropped off at the mall on a Saturday afternoon, with a few crumpled bills, some pocket change, and endless hours to pass with your friends. The food court was more than just a place to eat. For teenagers of the 1980s, it was a kind of stage, a place where growing up happened out in the open, framed by neon lights, plastic trays, and the constant hum of 1,000 conversations. The moment you walked in, you were greeted by the mingling scents: greasy slices of pizza, buttered popcorn, cinnamon pretzels, and the sweet citrus tang of orange Julius floating in the air. The sound was just as powerful. The scrape of chairs across the floor, laughter echoing between tiled walls, the clatter of coins dropping into arcade machines just a hallway away. But food wasn't really the point. A single soda, carefully sipped and endlessly refilled, could last for hours. A slice of pizza grew cold while conversations grew warm. You weren't there to dine. You were there to belong. Tables filled quickly with groups of teenagers, friends squeezed shoulder to shoulder, trading secrets, swapping jokes, and stealing glances at the people they hoped were stealing glances back. Parents treated the mall as a kind of safe babysitter, a bright and buzzing place where security guards strolled and music played from every corner. They dropped you off with the promise to return in a few hours, trusting that you'd be safe beneath the fluorescent lights. And for that span of time, you and your friends felt like you owned the world. The food court had its unspoken rules. Sit too close to the arcade, and you'd be drowned out by the shouts of kids chasing high scores. Choose the tables near the corner, and you might catch sight of the popular crowd, sprawled out and laughing like they had been born with more hours in the day than anyone else. And if you were lucky, if you were bold, you might trade a smile with someone across the room. A fleeting connection that meant more than it ever should have. There was a rhythm to those afternoons. You arrived with no plans, lingered with no urgency, and somehow filled every moment. A soda straw twirled between your fingers. A notebook doodled with hearts and band logos was passed around. Someone told a story you'd heard a dozen times before, but you laughed anyway because it was theirs, and because that's what friends did. Looking back now, the food court feels less like a place and more like a memory of transition, of being old enough to roam without a parent by your side, but still young enough to measure time in slices of pizza and soft pretzels. It was independence, but with training wheels. It was the freedom to gather, to watch, to be watched, and to learn who you were becoming under the glow of mall skylights. Even today, when you step into a mall, there's something about the echo of your footsteps on the polished floor that can bring it all back. The sound of a soda machine humming in the background, the faint smell of fried food, and the distant chatter of teenagers who have no idea how quickly those hours will turn into years. For those who lived it, the food court was more than a cluster of plastic tables. It was a rite of passage, a weekly ritual, a little world where youth announced itself in laughter and neon. And though few ever spoke of it as special, it lingers in memory like a snapshot. Friends leaning over trays, heads together, as the rest of the mall passed by unnoticed. And so, from the neon lights of the mall to the padded shoulders of a new fashion craze, the journey through the peculiar beauty of the 1980s continues. There are certain fashions that, when we look back, almost feel like costumes. Shoulder pads were one of them. Yet, in their moment, they were not costumes at all. They were power-stitched right into fabric, armor hidden beneath satin, cotton, and polyester, transforming anyone who wore them into a figure larger than life. In the 1980s, shoulder pads were everywhere. They slipped into blouses and dresses, into casual jackets and business suits. They were sewn in by designers, velcroed in as afterthoughts, and sometimes rearranged at home, tucked into place just so. The effect was instant. Shoulders became square, lines sharpened, and the person in the mirror suddenly seemed bolder than the one who had stepped in just a moment before. For teenagers on their way to homeroom, a blazer with padded shoulders made them feel like they were striding into a boardroom. For women stepping into the workplace, those padded lines carried weight. They signaled strength, competence, the ability to take up space in rooms where voices often had to fight to be heard. Even for those just heading out to dinner, slipping on a blouse with pads built into the seams offered a quiet thrill, a sense of confidence stitched into every inch. The bigger the pads, the bigger the presence. Entire city sidewalks were filled with squared silhouettes, men and women, young and old, moving like a parade of unspoken importance. Class photos captured rows of students whose jackets seemed to echo the armor of athletes, every shoulder jutting forward as though preparing for battle. And in a way, it was battle. social, professional, personal. Clothing became a shield against doubt. There was humor in it too, of course. Remove the pads, and suddenly the shirt would slump, deflated, its dramatic outline gone. Friends laughed at the exaggeration, joking that people looked like football players disguised for office jobs. But even when they laughed, they wore them all the same. Because shoulder pads worked. They made you feel taller. They made you feel ready. If someone bumped into you in a crowded hallway, you barely felt it. The pads absorbed the impact, as though proving their worth both practically and symbolically. Looking back, the photos seem comical. The proportions were almost cartoonish, the fabric jutting out far wider than seemed reasonable. And yet, there is tenderness in remembering. Those shoulder pads carried more than fashion. They carried hope. They reflected a world where style was about more than looking pretty. It was about looking like you meant business, even when you were still figuring out what that business might be. For many, the memory is not about the pads themselves, but about the feeling that came with them. The moment of standing in front of the mirror, shoulders squared, chin lifted just slightly higher, and realizing that clothes had the power to change how you saw yourself. That quiet boost was worth every joke and every oversized silhouette. Decades later, when people find an old blazer in the back of a closet, sometimes they slip it on just for fun. The pads may be worn, the fabric may be dated, but the feeling is still there. That odd sense of invincibility, of walking just a little taller, returns. And for a moment, the world feels once again like a place you can stride into with confidence, ready for anything. Shoulder pads were armor, yes, but they were also permission. The kind that whispered, "You belong here, you are strong enough, you can take up space." And in their exaggerated way, they helped a generation face the world one padded step at a time. And as we leave the mirror behind, the story drifts into the schoolyard, where another fad of the 1980s snapped into place. Loud, colorful, and impossible to ignore. The slap bracelet. Some memories arrive with a sound. For many children of the 1980s, that sound was the sharp, satisfying snap of a slap bracelet curling tight around a wrist. They were simple things, just thin strips of metal wrapped in bright fabric, patterned with neon swirls, animal prints, or sparkles that shimmered in the sunlight. Straight in one hand, and then, with a flick, coiled instantly around your arm like a snake. The motion was quick, clean, and addictive. You never really stopped at just one. Again and again, the bracelet slapped against skin, each time closing with a snug hug and that crisp little sound that echoed across playgrounds. At recess, they were currency. Some children had one, others had dozens. They traded them, stacked them, compared colors, and tested the loudness of each snap like it was a contest. The bolder the pattern, the brighter the neon, the cooler you were. A row of bracelets climbing up a forearm was a badge of status, a quiet way of telling the world that you were part of something exciting and new. But with every fad, there came whispers. Teachers frowned at the distraction. Parents worried about the metal hidden beneath the fabric. Rumors spread that the bracelets could split open, leaving sharp edges exposed. Stories of scraped arms and bent strips circulated in hushed tones. And when schools began banning them, their popularity only grew. There was something deliciously rebellious about slipping one into your backpack even after the rules said no. To wear one during class was to test the boundaries, tapping it against your desk, rolling it up and down your arm while pretending to take notes. And when the teacher confiscated it, you knew it would somehow make its way back into your hands again. Slap bracelets had a way of returning, like contraband too beloved to stay hidden. The truth was, they weren't just toys. They were fashion. They were fidget. They were little bursts of thrill in an otherwise ordinary school day. For a few seconds, that snap on your wrist was enough to make you laugh, to gather your friends closer, to feel like you belonged to the noisy, colorful chaos of youth. Looking back, it's easy to smile at how much these simple bands once meant, how something so small could carry the weight of excitement, friendship, and just a hint of danger. Even now, the memory of that sharp sound is enough to pull you back to a playground filled with laughter, sneakers scuffing the pavement, and sunlight bouncing off metal hidden under fabric. And isn't that what childhood often was? Not grand adventures, but tiny rebellions. Not monumental victories, but moments of joy carried in your pocket. A slap bracelet was never just a strip of metal. It was a spark, something to fidget with, to share, to lose and regain, to wear proudly as a piece of the 1980s that belonged entirely to you. And so, from the snap of bracelets on the playground, we move toward the fashions of another kind. Stranger, perhaps, and even more unforgettable. A decade where fabric stretched beneath the feet and style sometimes made you look more like a gymnast than a student. The story now shifts to stirrup pants. Some fashions linger in memory not because they were elegant, but because they were unforgettable. Stirrup pants belong to that category. Strange, impractical, a little uncomfortable. And yet, for a shining moment in the 1980s, they were everywhere. They were simple leggings at first glance, stretchy, snug, often in synthetic fabrics that caught the light and clung to the skin. But the detail that set them apart was the strap of fabric that looped beneath the arch of the foot. It was meant to keep the pants smooth, pulled tight, never riding up. In reality, it tugged at your socks, made your feet sweat, and bunched in ways that only a teenager with patience for fashion could endure. Still, they were worn with pride. Bright colors, fuchsia, teal, electric blue, mixed with bold patterns that seemed almost louder than the voices in a crowded hallway. They were paired with oversized sweaters, with blazers padded at the shoulder, or with tunics that draped dramatically down the thigh. From the knees up, you looked ready for the principal's office. From the knees down, you looked ready for gymnastics practice. That was part of the fun. School Picture Day captured entire classes lined with them, rows of students standing stiffly, shoes half hidden beneath elastic straps, the glossy shine of spandex gleaming beneath the flash of the camera. Looking back now, the outfits seem mismatched, even ridiculous, but at the time, they were fashion, and fashion meant belonging. There was a peculiar comfort to stirrup pants as well. The way the strap clung beneath your foot gave you a sense of security, as though your clothing had anchored itself to you. For some, it almost felt like being held. You moved through the day with the faint awareness of that gentle pull at your arches, a reminder that you were tied to something bigger than yourself. A trend, a look, a moment, of course. They weren't flattering on everyone. The snug fit made calves look rounder, thighs look stronger, and every curve of the leg more pronounced than it had any right to be. Friends teased each other about the sausage-like shape they created. Parents rolled their eyes at yet another fad that would vanish as quickly as it appeared. But for those who wore them, stirrup pants were more than just fabric. They were identity stitched in elastic. In malls, they appeared under fluorescent lights, paired with scrunch socks and white sneakers. On playgrounds, they flashed in neon hues as children ran, the straps snapping against sneakers with every step. At sleepovers, they were swapped, borrowed, and admired. And for some, they were the chosen outfit for a first school dance. A little shiny, a little awkward, but absolutely perfect in the way only youth can make something perfect. What stands out now is not the oddity of the style, but the courage of it. Stirrup pants belong to a decade that never shied away from experiments. A decade that stacked sweaters over turtlenecks, teased hair into gravity-defying clouds, and made boldness the baseline for beauty. Wearing stirrup pants was never about elegance. It was about stepping into a look so unusual, so unapologetic, that it became powerful. They've faded now, tucked away into yearbooks and photographs stored in attic boxes. But if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the sound of sneakers squeaking in a gymnasium, almost see the stretch of spandex catching the light, almost feel the snug grip underfoot. For those who lived it, stirrup pants were not just clothing. They were a rite of passage, awkward, uncomfortable, and strangely beloved. And so the journey through 1980s fashion moves from stirrup straps to denim splattered in bleach, where rebellion was worn at the ankle, and jeans carried the attitude of a generation. Some trends arrive quietly. Acid wash denim did not. It came crashing into the 1980s like a bottle of bleach spilled across blue jeans, leaving behind blotches and streaks that looked more like an accident than a design. And yet, somehow, it worked. It caught on with such force that entire hallways of American schools shimmered in cloudy patches of pale and dark denim, as if everyone had stepped out of the same mysterious laundromat experiment. Acid wash jeans were loud before you even opened your mouth. They announced you from a distance. The mottled fabric caught the fluorescent lights of malls, the flash of school cameras, and the glow of arcades, turning the simple act of wearing pants into a statement. Parents frowned, teachers sighed, but teenagers embraced the chaos. There was a kind of rebellion woven into those jeans. Smooth blue denim belonged to an earlier time. Safe, respectable, a little too plain. Acid wash was messy. It was unpredictable. And in a decade that celebrated excess, unpredictability was exactly the point. Some wore theirs rolled tight at the ankle, showing off high-top sneakers in neon or white leather. Others let the hems drag frayed and heavy over boots. Jackets matched the jeans in full sets that made entire outfits look like walking explosions of bleach. There were skirts, vests, and even hats. Whole wardrobes built around this one idea, that denim should never, ever blend in. For many, slipping on a pair of acid wash jeans felt like pulling on confidence itself. You were saying, without a word, that you were part of the generation that refused to dress quietly, that you were unafraid of being noticed. Even if you didn't feel brave, the jeans did the talking for you. Old photographs tell the story best. Groups of friends stand in front of lockers, each one wrapped in denim that looks half destroyed and yet entirely alive. The faces are smiling, hair sprayed high, sneakers bright, and always, always the jeans capturing the eye first. Looking back, you can almost hear the chatter in the hallway, the squeak of rubber soles, the faint smell of hairspray and cafeteria pizza lingering in the air. Acid wash denim wasn't flattering in the traditional sense. The patterns didn't slim or smooth. They drew attention, often to places you might not have wanted attention, but no one cared. The fun was in the spectacle, in the feeling that you were part of a wave sweeping across the culture. It didn't matter that your mom hated the look. It mattered that your friends thought it was cool. There was also a strange unity in it. Every group, athletes, band kids, skaters, even the shy ones who hung back by the lockers, found themselves wearing versions of the same wild fabric. Acid wash didn't belong to one clique. It belonged to the entire generation, as though everyone, for just a few years, had agreed to dress in a kind of collective rebellion. Today, when you pull an old pair from the back of a closet or spot one at a thrift store, it feels like touching the spirit of the 1980s. The denim is stiff, the pattern almost garish, and yet there's something magnetic about it. Something that whispers of a time when fashion wasn't about perfection. It was about personality. Acid wash jeans may not have lasted forever. Their moment came and went. But for those who wore them, they will always carry the memory of a decade that refused to play it safe. A decade that believed even your pants could shout, could rebel, could laugh in the face of convention. And so the story of denim in the 1980s rolls forward, from bleach-splattered chaos to velvet-wrapped ponytails, where scrunchies grew as large and colorful as the decade itself. In the 1980s, even the smallest accessory could feel larger than life. And perhaps nothing captured that spirit more than the scrunchie. They weren't just hair ties. They were soft, plush statements, bright loops of fabric that wrapped around ponytails like velvet halos. Big, bold, and unmistakable, they seemed to float atop the hairstyles of a generation. To slip one on was to add a little celebration to your day, even if you were just heading to math class or strolling into the lunchroom. The scrunchie was playful. It was practical. But more than that, it was visible. You could spot one from across a crowded cafeteria, the neon pink glowing against blonde hair, the shimmering satin catching the fluorescent lights, or the leopard print daring you to look twice. They bounced when you walked. They softened every ponytail and bun into something that looked intentional, even when it wasn't. For many girls, one scrunchie was never enough. They stacked them, color upon color, like bracelets of fabric clouding their wrists. Some coordinated theirs with shoelaces, earrings, or even the patterns on their socks. Others wore one like a badge of readiness, around the wrist, waiting for that moment when hair needed to be pulled back, whether for gym class or a last-minute dance in the hallway. And oh, the colors. Scrunchies came in every shade imaginable. Bright neon greens that matched the leg warmers of aerobics videos, deep purples that shimmered like satin gowns, polka dots, sparkles, sequins, bows, an endless parade of fabric that turned a simple elastic into a personality piece. It was as if the decade's joy spilled over into these little circles of cloth, letting every kid carry a small piece of brightness with them. Looking back now, the oversized proportions seem almost silly. The scrunchies were enormous, puffing out like fabric donuts perched on a head of teased hair. But that was the point. The 1980s weren't a time for subtlety. They were a time for saying yes to color, yes to volume, yes to fun. Even if it made no sense by traditional fashion rules, there was also comfort in them. Unlike the thin elastics that tugged and snapped, scrunchies were gentle. They held hair without tearing it, without leaving those sharp marks behind. For a generation growing up in a world of hairspray and heat, the scrunchie was a rare moment of softness, a small mercy wrapped in velvet, and they weren't just for hair. They became fidget toys in class, twisted and tugged during long lessons. They were traded among friends like tokens of trust. They were borrowed, stolen, and gifted, carrying with them the quiet intimacy of teenage life. A scrunchie on your wrist could even be a sign, a little unspoken message passed between crushes in the hallways. It wasn't just fabric, it was communication. Photographs from the era show scrunchies everywhere. In school portraits, ponytails soar high above smiling faces, each one crowned in a burst of fabric. At roller rinks, they glow under neon lights as kids whirl in circles, laughter echoing across the floor. At sleepovers, they pile on the edges of beds, scrunchies tossed aside as giggles fill the night. They were ordinary, yes, but they were also unforgettable. Scrunchies may have faded from the spotlight in the years that followed, but they never disappeared entirely. And when they made their return decades later, it felt less like a comeback and more like a reminder that joy never really goes out of style, that softness and playfulness always have a place, even in a world that moves too quickly. For anyone who wore them back then, the memory is still vivid. The feel of soft fabric around the wrist, the gentle tug as it slipped into place, and the way even a messy bun could look like a party waiting to happen. Scrunchies were, in their own way, velvet clouds, light, bright, and endlessly comforting. And as the 1980s marched on, those velvet clouds drifted into another soundtrack of the decade, heavy boomboxes on shoulders, blasting music into the streets, declaring that style wasn't just worn, it was heard. There are few images of the 1980s more iconic than a teenager walking down the street with a giant boombox balanced on one shoulder. Heavy, rectangular, lined with chrome dials and oversized speakers, it wasn't just a machine. It was a statement, a moving soundtrack, a declaration of taste, and sometimes a challenge. The boombox was not small or subtle. It took both hands to carry, and batteries weighed it down like bricks. But once you pressed play, the world around you changed. Music spilled into the open air, unapologetic, filling sidewalks, basketball courts, and subway cars with rhythm. It was freedom you could hear, confidence you could feel in your chest as the bass rattled against your ribs. On city streets, boomboxes became part of the landscape. Corners lit up with beats of hip-hop, funk, or rock, each crew trying to outdo the next with volume and style. In playgrounds and parks, kids set them on picnic tables, turning ordinary afternoons into block parties. Even in the suburbs, where cul-de-sacs usually echoed with the quiet buzz of sprinklers, The sudden pulse of a boombox meant that summer had truly arrived. And then, of course, there were the battles. Two groups might gather at the same spot, each with their own box blasting. It wasn't always about fighting. It was about presence, about showing whose music spoke louder, whose rhythm owned the day. Sometimes it ended in laughter, other times in dance-offs that stretched late into the evening. The music was competitive, but the joy was shared. Cassettes played their role too. Friends made tapes and swapped them, sliding them into decks and waiting for that satisfying click before the music roared to life. You could tell a lot about someone from the cassette inside their boombox, whether it was Run DMC or Madonna, Prince, or The Clash. The music announced not just what you liked, but who you were becoming. For teenagers, carrying a boombox was a kind of rite of passage. It wasn't just about enjoying music. It was about broadcasting it. It was about saying, "This is me, this is what I love," and daring the world to listen. Some parents shook their heads at the volume, but even they couldn't deny the energy it brought, the way it pulled kids together in a swirl of sound and camaraderie. The memory of those moments lingers in the senses. The metallic clunk of the play button, the faint hiss of the tape as it spun, the sudden flood of bass spilling out like it belonged to everyone in earshot. Even the act of hoisting that heavy machine onto your shoulder left a kind of mark, a sore muscle maybe, but also the feeling that for a little while you carried an entire stage with you. Looking back now, the boombox feels impossibly large, almost cartoonish compared to the devices that fit in our pockets today. But its size was part of the magic. It demanded space, demanded notice, and turned private music into public memory. Songs weren't just heard by one person. They were shared, filling the air, weaving themselves into afternoons on the blacktop or nights leaning against brick walls. For those who lived it, the sound of a boombox isn't just about the music itself. It's about the friends who gathered around, the laughter that rose between songs, the feeling that your block, your park, your little corner of the world had its own soundtrack. And as the beat fades into memory, the story turns to something quieter, but no less powerful. The mixtape. Handmade, heartfelt, and passed from one set of hands to another, it was music turned into love letter. In the 1980s, love and friendship often spoke in the language of music, and the mixtape was its most tender form. It wasn't something you could buy. A mixtape had to be made. Patiently, carefully, with hours spent hunched beside a stereo, finger hovering over the record button. You waited for the right song to play on the radio, sometimes holding your breath through the DJ's chatter, praying he wouldn't talk over the intro. And when the moment finally arrived, you pressed record, capturing not just the song, but the memory of the wait. Every mixtape was personal. It was a soundtrack stitched together from bits of someone's heart. The choices weren't random. A song wasn't just a song, it was a message. Track 1 might say, "I've been thinking about you." Track 5 might whisper, "I miss you." And somewhere near the end, maybe there was a playful tune to make the listener smile, a gentle reminder that love could also be fun. The tape itself carried the intimacy. Plastic, small enough to slip into a pocket, yet capable of holding hours of unspoken words. Labels were decorated with doodles, hearts, or carefully written titles in blue ink. Some were wrapped in folded notebook paper, lyrics scribbled in the margins. Others were handed over without a word, the meaning carried entirely in the music inside. To receive one was to be seen. To press play and hear a familiar song fade into another, and then another, was to feel chosen. Every transition revealed something. What made your friend laugh? What reminded them of summer nights at the roller rink? What made them think of you? The mixtape was less about perfect sound and more about presence. It was proof that someone had sat for hours, listening, waiting, recording, just to create something meant only for you. Teenagers passed them in hallways, slid them into lockers, tucked them inside backpacks. Lovers traded them like secret diaries. Friends swapped them as tokens of loyalty, shared promises that the music they loved would always connect them, even when distance grew. The experience of listening was just as magical. The faint hiss of the cassette filled the silence before the first track began. Sometimes a snippet of a DJ's voice crept in, or the recording cut off just a second too soon. But those imperfections became part of the charm. They made the tape human. They made it real. Looking back, the mixtape feels almost sacred. It wasn't instant. It wasn't disposable. It took time, patience, and intention. It was a love letter disguised as music, a playlist before the word even existed. And for many, those tapes became artifacts of youth, stacked in shoeboxes, hidden in drawers, still carrying the weight of feelings too big to speak out loud. If you've ever found one years later, slipped it into a dusty player, and heard those songs again, you know the feeling. Suddenly, you're back in your old bedroom, posters on the wall, headphones too large for your head, heart racing with the thrill of being remembered. The music carries you back to a version of yourself that once believed every lyric was written just for you. Mixtapes may have faded with time, replaced by digital playlists that take seconds to build. But nothing can replace the patience of waiting for a song, the rush of pressing record at the perfect moment, or the sweetness of giving someone a piece of your heart wrapped in magnetic tape. And so, as the final song clicks to an end, the story of the 1980s moves into another bright memory, when colors were louder than words, and neon itself became a kind of youth anthem. If the 1980s could be painted with a single brush, the canvas would glow, and the color it would glow in was neon. It wasn't just clothing. It was a statement, a way of life, a kind of brightness that dared the world to look. Neon pink, highlighter yellow, electric green, and bright orange, shades so bold they seemed to hum under the lights. They weren't meant to blend in. They shouted, they laughed, they insisted that life itself could be as bright as a marker scribbled across the page. Walk into any middle school or roller rink in those years, and it felt as though the world had been dipped into fluorescent paint. Jackets blazed in pinks that glowed like sunsets. Socks, stacked high and scrunched at the ankles, pulsed with lime green. Shoelaces, headbands, even earrings reflected those daring hues. Under the black lights of skating rinks, neon turned surreal. Faces glowing, shirts shining, entire crowds shimmering like fireflies caught in motion. For kids, it was power and color. A neon t-shirt could make you feel noticed in a crowded cafeteria. A set of neon bangles could draw a friend's attention before you even spoke. A pair of neon shoelaces transformed ordinary sneakers into something worth showing off. And for a generation that was just learning how to declare themselves, how to step into the world with confidence. Neon was a voice all its own. Parents, of course, looked on with a mixture of amusement and bewilderment. To them, the colors were garish, almost absurd, like traffic cones worn as fashion. But to the young, they were radiant, irresistible. It wasn't about elegance, it was about energy. Neon belonged to the bold, to the hopeful, to the ones who wanted to live life loudly, even if only through their socks and shoelaces. The memories are vivid. Gym classes filled with students lined in neon shorts, bouncing basketballs that echoed in cavernous gyms. Birthday parties where paper cups and streamers matched the clothes the kids were wearing, entire rooms glowing like candy. Trips to the mall where store windows were alive with mannequins in neon windbreakers, luring teenagers to spend their babysitting money on a shade of green or orange that simply couldn't be ignored. There was something oddly innocent about it, too. Neon didn't try to be cool in a sophisticated sense. It wasn't smooth or subtle. It was cheerful. It was almost childlike in its brightness, reminding everyone that youth itself is loud, messy, and full of life. In the photographs that remain, those colors have never faded. They still glow just as brightly today, pulling us back into roller rinks, cafeterias, and summer afternoons where the sun hit the fabric and made the colors almost too bright to look at directly. And perhaps that was the real beauty of neon. It wasn't meant to last forever. It was meant to shine in its moment, to leave an impression that decades later still burns in memory. Even now, when neon resurfaces from time to time, it carries with it the laughter of those years. It reminds us of lockers lined with posters, of mixtapes blaring from boomboxes, of hands held during slow skates beneath spinning lights. Neon wasn't just fashion. It was youth itself, bottled in color too bright to ignore. And as we leave those glowing shades behind, we turn to another cherished symbol of the decade. Not worn, but carried. A simple binder with a Velcro flap that snapped shut with authority, treasured by students everywhere. The Trapper Keeper. Long before laptops and digital calendars, organization in school meant one thing: the Trapper Keeper. To the untrained eye, it was just a binder. But to any kid walking into a classroom in the mid-1980s, it was so much more. It was a badge of identity, a statement of taste, a small but mighty status symbol that could set you apart the moment you laid it down on your desk. The outside was glossy, smooth, and bold. Designs ranged from neon grids that looked like they came straight out of a video game to galloping horses, soaring hot air balloons, and geometric patterns that seemed to buzz with energy. Some even had cartoon characters or sports themes, every cover telling its own story. And when you walked into class and set one on the table, heads turned. Everyone wanted to see which design you had chosen, or which design your parents had let you pick. Then there was the sound. That unforgettable rip of Velcro as the flap tore open, loud enough to turn a few heads, satisfying enough to make you do it twice just for the joy of it. Inside, everything was neatly contained: folders, notepads, sometimes even secret notes tucked between dividers. A Trapper Keeper promised order in a world of loose papers and messy backpacks, but it wasn't just about staying organized. It was about belonging. In the cafeteria, you might spot a group of friends comparing theirs, showing off new designs like they were trading cards. At the bus stop, someone's trapper keeper balanced on their knees as they doodled on the inside covers. During class, the kid with the coolest design seemed to hold just a little more sway, as if the binder itself lent them confidence. The trapper keeper was also a canvas for personality. Stickers decorated its surface. Initials were carved into the plastic. Favorite bands scribbled in permanent marker along the edges. Some kids taped photographs inside the flap. Celebrities, crushes, or even Polaroids from family vacations. Over time, each binder became less like a product and more like a diary. And of course, there were the secrets it held. Past notes folded into triangles, tucked carefully into a pocket. A mixtape track list written in the margins. A sketch of a teacher, exaggerated and silly, hidden under homework assignments. For many, their trapper keeper was less about schoolwork and more about keeping the little pieces of youth safe. It's funny to think how much weight such a simple object carried. But in the world of lockers and pencil sharpeners, where so much felt ordinary, the trapper keeper stood out. It made you feel prepared, important, even stylish. It was as if you could organize not just your papers, but your life within those Velcro-sealed flaps. Looking back, the trapper keeper shines as one of those perfect artifacts of the 1980s, an everyday object elevated into memory because of what it represented. Independence, identity, a little flash of cool carried under your arm, and when the bell rang, when kids shuffled out into hallways with the sound of Velcro still echoing behind them, there was no mistaking it. The trapper keeper wasn't just holding homework. It was holding a piece of childhood itself. From glossy binders, we move into something far smaller, far sillier, and yet somehow just as beloved. The simple joy of scratch and sniff stickers, treasures that turned sheets of paper into scented wonderlands. Sometimes, the smallest things leave the deepest memories. In the 1980s, one of those treasures came in the form of little squares of paper, stickers that didn't just shine or sparkle, but carried a scent. They were called Scratch and Sniff, and to children of that era, they were nothing short of magic. Imagine sitting at a cafeteria table or on the carpet of a classroom during reading time with a sheet of these stickers in front of you. Each one brightly colored, smiling fruits, cartoon animals, cheerful ice cream cones, and each one promising a smell as playful as its picture. A grape sticker gave off the syrupy sweetness of candy. A pizza slice carried a surprisingly warm, savory scent. A root beer mug fizzed in your imagination the moment you scratched it. The ritual was always the same. You'd take a fingernail or the edge of a pencil and gently rub the surface, releasing the fragrance hidden inside. Then came the moment of sharing, passing the sheet to a friend, leaning in close to compare scents, trading one for another as though they were currency. A single rare sticker like popcorn or skunk could make you the envy of the whole class. They weren't just stickers, they were tokens of belonging. Kids collected them in albums, carefully arranged like stamps, each page holding not just a picture, but a tiny burst of smell that carried the weight of childhood wonder. Flipping through an album was like opening a time capsule. You didn't just see the memories, you smelled them. Artificial as those scents were, they sparked joy. They stitched the everyday moments of school and play into something unforgettable. Teachers sometimes used them as rewards. A scratch and sniff star on the corner of a homework page could brighten an entire week. Parents tucked them into birthday cards or bought them as little treats during trips to the store. They were inexpensive, fleeting, yet somehow priceless in the eyes of a child. And of course, there was the simple happiness of peeling one off and sticking it to the front of a trapper keeper, or the cover of a notebook, or even the corner of a bedroom mirror. Wherever they landed, they carried their scent like a secret. Each time you brushed your hand across it, the smell returned, and with it came the rush of memory, of friends, of laughter, of the easy joy of being a child. Looking back now, the magic of scratch and sniff stickers seems almost innocent in its simplicity. They didn't require batteries or screens. They didn't connect to anything larger than the little world of a classroom desk. And yet, they connected us to each other. Through trades, through laughter, through the shared surprise that something so small could hold such delight. Perhaps that's why they linger in memory. For a generation, those stickers weren't just paper. They were proof that childhood didn't need to be complicated to be wondrous. They reminded us that happiness could be found in the simplest scratch, and that sometimes joy has a scent all its own. And as the scents of childhood fade into the background, another strange and beloved artifact rises in memory. This time, not from the classroom, but from the bedroom. A piece of furniture that promised adventure, comfort, and more than a little frustration. The waterbed. There are certain inventions that seemed, for a fleeting moment, to carry the promise of the future. For the 1980s, one of those was the waterbed. Sleek advertisements promised comfort, romance, and style. Magazines painted them as the ultimate modern luxury. And for many families, owning one felt like stepping a little closer to the dream of living in tomorrow. But the reality of a waterbed was something far more complicated and often far funnier. Step into a teenager's bedroom from that decade, and you might find a massive wooden frame dominating the space, filled with gallons upon gallons of water sealed in vinyl. The moment you sat down, the whole surface shifted, rolling beneath you in slow waves. Lying on it felt less like resting on a mattress and more like floating in a tiny, private ocean. Children loved them. To a child, a waterbed was not a piece of furniture. It was an amusement park ride. They jumped, they bounced, they tried to surf its surface, squealing as the waves rolled them toward the edge. But for parents, those same waves often meant sore backs, restless nights, and the worry of tiny leaks that could turn a bedroom into a disaster zone. There was a strangeness to it all. Making the bed was a challenge. Tucking sheets tightly on a surface that refused to stay still. Rolling over could send your partner sliding toward the edge, or worse, bouncing back with a ripple that refused to settle. And yet, despite the impracticality, there was something undeniably cool about having a waterbed in the 1980s. It was more than just a place to sleep. It was a status symbol. Friends whispered about who in the neighborhood had one. Teenagers bragged if their rooms held one of those gently sloshing rectangles. And in certain households, it became part of the family story. Laughed about over dinners and remembered for years afterward. Of course, the charm didn't last forever. Leaks happened. Heaters failed, vinyl cracked. By the 1990s, the Waterbeds' reign was fading, remembered more for its inconveniences than its comforts. Many were drained, dismantled, and hauled away, replaced by something simpler, sturdier, and less likely to leave you seasick in your sleep. And yet, when we look back, Waterbeds still hold a special place in memory. They remind us of a time when style was sometimes valued more than sense, when innovation was measured in bold experiments, and when even a bed could become a symbol of what it meant to be modern. For some, the memory is tied to laughter, the sound of siblings jumping onto the bed against every rule in the house. For others, it's the awkwardness of trying to study or read while the surface refused to stay still. And for a few, it is the bittersweet recollection of youthful nights, lying back against the shifting waves, staring at posters on the ceiling, dreaming of the future. Looking back, the waterbed was a perfect reflection of the 1980s itself, bold, extravagant, and more than a little impractical. It was a decade unafraid to try something unusual, even if it didn't last. And from those shifting, liquid nights, we moved towards something more familiar and universal. A family gathered in the living room, fiddling with antennas, hoping to catch just the right signal. The strange ballet of rabbit ears and static, the nightly dance of television in an analog age. There was a certain ritual to television in the 1980s, one that modern streaming has erased entirely. Back then, the picture on your screen wasn't guaranteed, and the act of watching TV was as much about patience as it was about entertainment. Sitting down in the living room, families often found themselves gathered not only around the program itself, but around the delicate balancing act of antennas and rabbit ears. The set would hum faintly, its wooden frame warm to the touch, as someone, often the youngest in the room, was called upon to stand beside the television, gripping the metal rabbit ears like a conductor holding two awkward batons. With a twist this way, or a tilt that way, the snowy haze of static might dissolve into a clearer picture. Sometimes it required the entire family's input. "Hold it right there," one person would call as the image sharpened. "Don't move," another would laugh as if a simple breath might send the signal scattering again. It was a dance between household members and invisible waves traveling through the air. A dance marked by frustration, laughter, and the occasional small triumph when the screen finally locked into place, displaying the faces of favorite characters or the excitement of a live event. The joy wasn't only in the shows themselves, but in those moments of anticipation. The whole family would lean forward as if willing the image into clarity. When it worked, there was a cheer, a sense of shared victory, proof that for the moment at least, the television was in harmony with the world outside. Children often had to serve as the antenna stand-ins, standing awkwardly with one hand on the metal rods because, mysteriously, the picture was somehow clearer that way. It was both a nuisance and an honor, to be chosen as the one holding still while everyone else enjoyed the show. The oddity of it all became part of the memory, the way human touch seemed to matter, the way families worked together in that strange ballet of static and signal. And then there were the moments when everything fell apart. Just as the hero delivered the big line, or the game reached its most thrilling play, the picture might dissolve into snow again. The groan of disappointment filled the room, followed quickly by someone leaping up to adjust the antenna once more. It was a cycle of hope and exasperation that repeated countless times in countless living rooms. Looking back, those rabbit ears were more than an accessory to the television. They were a symbol of how imperfect and yet communal entertainment once was. In today's world, where a clear, high-definition picture is expected at the press of a button, it's easy to forget that part of the magic once lay in the struggle itself, the shared effort, the laughter at the absurdity, the patience learned from waiting for a signal. These were as much a part of the viewing experience as the programs that flickered across the screen. There was warmth in those imperfect nights. Parents in recliners, children sprawled on the carpet. Everyone invested not just in the story on television, but in the fragile connection that brought it into their home. It made the act of watching feel more alive, more human, because it required the family to be present, to work together, to laugh at the frustrations, and to celebrate the victories. The rabbit ears, with their awkward stretch and silver gleam, may seem like relics now. But in the soft glow of memory, they are reminders of a slower, gentler time. A time when even the static on the screen could feel strangely comforting, and when the dance of antennas was part of the soundtrack of American evenings. And as those nights fade into the past, another memory arises, of colored lights swirling across polished floors, of music echoing beneath the mirrored ball, and of first romances blooming on roller skates. From the living room to the roller rink, the journey of the 1980s continues. There was a kind of enchantment that came alive beneath the mirrored ball of a roller rink. Step through the doors, and the ordinary world seemed to fade, replaced by swirling neon lights, the rhythmic hum of wheels on polished wood, and the faint smell of popcorn and pepperoni pizza wafting from the concession stand. It was a place where childhood, adolescence, and first freedoms all rolled together in perfect circles. The floor itself gleamed under the glow of colored lights. Pink, blue, and green beams swept across the surface, transforming it into a moving canvas where every skater became part of the show. The music thumped low through the speakers, pop songs of the day, disco holdovers, and the occasional slow ballad that hushed the room with its opening notes. For a moment, the rink wasn't just about skating. It was about belonging to something bigger, a shared rhythm where everyone moved together. Children clung to the railings at first, laughing as they stumbled, the wheels slipping out from under them before balance finally arrived. Teenagers circled the rink in pairs or in packs, weaving confidently, the sound of their wheels blending into a steady hiss. And somewhere in that magical space, the shy glances of first crushes were exchanged. A slow song would begin, and suddenly two hands would meet, tentative at first, then braver as they circled the rink together. Those moments, awkward, sweet, unforgettable, were as much a part of roller rinks as the lights and the music. Even the food was part of the memory. Cardboard pizza slices, just hot enough to burn the roof of your mouth, tasted like the height of luxury when shared with friends during a skating break. Snow cones stained tongues bright blue or red, sticky fingers leaving trails on rental skates. The snack bar wasn't just a place to eat. It was a gathering point, a pause in the night where laughter rose louder than the music. And then there were the games, four-corner elimination, limbo contests, and the excitement of the announcer's voice echoing over the speakers, calling skaters to line up. The rink became a stage, and even the smallest child felt like a star under those neon lights. Prizes might be small, candy, stickers, a free pass for next week, but the thrill of winning lingered long after. Parents often sat along the sidelines, watching with soft smiles. They sipped on soda, chatted with other parents, and sometimes remembered their own nights at rinks years before. For them, the magic wasn't in the skating itself, but in seeing their children carve out memories that would last a lifetime. There was something endlessly hopeful about a roller rink. It was more than just wheels and music. It was a place where freedom was practiced, where community was built, and where the fleeting, awkward years of adolescence were softened by laughter and song. The glow of the rink lights seemed to say, "Here, you can belong, even if just for a few hours on a Friday night." Looking back now, roller rinks feel almost like dreamscapes, fragile, glowing worlds preserved in memory. The sound of rolling wheels and the shimmer of lights across the floor linger like echoes of a childhood night. They remind us of a time when the greatest adventure was stepping onto that glossy floor, heart racing, hands ready to reach for someone else's, and as the mirrored ball turned, scattering light across the rink, it seemed to promise that magic could be found in the simplest places, on 8 wheels, under neon glow, in the laughter of friends, circling endlessly, in the warmth of youth. From that neon-lit magic, the story of the 1980s turns to another frontier, the strange, boxy promise of early computers and the floppy disks that carried whole worlds of imagination within their thin frames. Before sleek laptops and glowing touchscreens, computers of the 1980s felt more like sturdy appliances than personal companions. They were beige boxes with screens that hummed faintly, their glass faces stretching deep into the desk like miniature televisions. A green or amber cursor blinked in the corner, patient and expectant, waiting for someone to type a command. There was a kind of seriousness about those machines, a weight that said, this was the future, even if it arrived in blocky letters and slow-loading programs. Families often gathered around a single computer, as though it were another piece of living room furniture. Children leaned in close, fascinated by games that seem impossibly simple now. Pixelated mazes, bouncing blocks, and spaceships made of a handful of glowing squares. Yet at the time, those games felt alive, thrilling in their ability to make the screen respond to the press of a key. It was the magic of interaction, of seeing imagination take shape in glowing dots of light. The soundscape of those early computers was unmistakable. Keys clacked loudly, each stroke echoing in the quiet of a living room or classroom. Printers rattled and groaned, slowly dragging paper through perforated edges with the steady tear of tractor feed strips. When the machine finally spat out its lines of text or a pixelated graphic, it felt like an accomplishment worth celebrating. And always nearby were the floppy disks, thin, square, and slightly fragile, each one holding entire worlds inside. To slide a floppy disk into its slot was to feel the tangible weight of possibility. The drive would whir, the disk spinning gently as the computer read its secrets. Children often labeled the covers with permanent marker, scrawling titles of games or school assignments in uneven letters. Some discs were decorated with stickers or doodles because owning even a small library of them felt like holding a personal treasure chest. There was something almost ceremonial about saving your work. A school essay, a simple drawing program, or even just a line of basic code. It all had to be carefully placed onto a floppy. The relief when the screen confirmed "file saved" was immense. In those moments, the floppy wasn't just plastic and magnetic film. It was security, memory, and the bridge between a child's imagination and something solid they could hold in their hand. And yet, floppies had their quirks. They bent easily. Dust and fingerprints could ruin them. And sometimes, without warning, a disk would fail, refusing to load the game or file that had been so carefully stored. The heartbreak of a corrupted floppy was unforgettable, a reminder that even the future was fragile. But when they worked, when the screen flickered to life with familiar programs, it felt like opening a window to possibility. For children of the 1980s, floppy disks and early computers weren't just tools. They were invitations into a new world, a world where information could be stored, shared, and imagined in ways no one had experienced before. Sitting at those beige keyboards, eyes glowing in the dim light of the monitor, it felt as though you were touching the edge of something vast, something just beginning. Looking back now, those clunky machines and fragile discs seem almost quaint, and yet they carried with them the wonder of first steps into a digital age. Their blinking cursors and whirring drives whispered a promise that the future could be written, one keystroke at a time, and saved onto a small square of plastic that fit in the palm of your hand. And from those fragile squares, the story of the 1980s turns to something far more playful. The twisting puzzles and small triumphs of the Rubik's Cube, another symbol of the era's curious and colorful spirit. In the 1980s, it seemed like nearly every household had one. A simple little cube, bright, glossy, and endlessly frustrating. The Rubik's Cube was more than just a toy. It was a puzzle that invited patience, persistence, and sometimes a little bit of trickery. Children would sit cross-legged on shag-carpeted floors, twisting the cube in their hands, the plastic clicking softly with each rotation. The colors flashed: red, blue, green, yellow, orange, white, each square holding the promise of order in a world that so easily fell into chaos. To solve it meant mastery. To fail it meant endless hours of twisting and turning, often ending in the familiar sigh of defeat. And yet, the cube was irresistible. Some children would peel the stickers off, carefully replacing them to make it seem solved. Others would pop the little squares out and snap them back into place, hoping no one would notice their shortcut. But for the rare kid who could truly solve it, without tricks, without shortcuts, they became legends of the classroom. A solved Rubik's Cube held aloft in the cafeteria was as good as a crown. Friends would gather around, awed by the speed of the hands that made sense of the impossible. There was something comforting about its sound. The clicking rotations, the feel of smooth plastic against your palms, the way the cube seemed to warm in your hands after hours of turning. It was meditative in a way, though no one thought of it like that back then. It was simply a challenge, a thing to do while sprawled on the couch or waiting for dinner to finish in the oven. Teachers sometimes kept a cube in the classroom, handing it to restless students as if to say, "Here, see if you can figure this out." It was both a distraction and a lesson in perseverance. Some kids carried theirs everywhere, stuffed into backpacks already heavy with trapper keepers and textbooks, edges worn soft from constant handling. And for many, even when the puzzle was never solved, it didn't matter. The fun was in the attempt, the ritual of trying, of hoping that maybe this time the colors would finally align. Looking back, the Rubik's Cube feels like a perfect symbol of the decade itself. Bright, bold, and a little confusing. It required patience, creativity, and a willingness to fail. Qualities that shaped an entire generation learning to navigate an ever-changing world. For parents, it was a quiet relief, a toy that required no batteries, no electricity, only a child's hands and attention. For children, it was a companion in long afternoons, a source of pride when even a single side lined up in perfect matching color. The victories were small, but they mattered. And isn't that what so many memories of the 1980s come down to? Small victories. The moment when the television picture cleared with a twist of the antenna. The relief when a floppy disk successfully saved a school assignment. The rush of joy when a Rubik's Cube clicked into order, side after side falling into place, as though it had chosen, at last, to cooperate. Even now, decades later, picking one up stirs something familiar. The plastic may feel lighter, the puzzle less intimidating, but the memory is there. The memory of being young, of believing that persistence could solve anything. And in those small victories, a generation found joy. From those twisting colors and playful struggles, the journey through the 1980s continues into another weekend ritual. Those golden hours of Saturday mornings when cartoons and jingles filled the air, and breakfast cereal was as much a part of the show as the heroes on the screen. There was a magic to Saturday mornings in the 1980s. Unlike the rushed weekdays filled with alarm clocks, school buses, and hurried breakfasts, Saturdays had a rhythm all their own. Children would wake before the sun had fully risen, creeping quietly into the living room in their pajamas. The house still felt hushed, but the television screen came to life with color and sound, filling the space with laughter, music, and the familiar faces of animated heroes. It wasn't just television, it was a ritual, a bowl of sugary cereal balanced carefully on a lap, the crunch of each bite mingling with the theme songs of shows like He-Man, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Transformers, and the Smurfs. Each intro carried the excitement of a whole world waiting to be discovered. The jingles that introduced the shows were so catchy, so simple, that even decades later, many can still hum them without effort. There was something special about those commercials, too. They weren't just interruptions. They were part of the experience. Brightly colored ads for toys, breakfast cereals, and action figures were stitched into the fabric of the morning. The jingles stayed in your head all day. Little earworms that you couldn't escape even if you tried. They're great. I have the power. Gotta catch 'em all. Each phrase burned into memory long before anyone realized they would become cultural touchstones. The living room became the stage for these simple joys. The glow of the old wood-paneled television, the static hum of rabbit ears, adjusted just enough to keep the picture clear, the way siblings would squabble over which show to watch next. For some, it was the only time all week when the rules bent just a little. Parents, still lingering in bed, allowed their children the freedom to indulge in cartoons before chores or errands claimed the rest of the day. There was comfort in the repetition. Week after week, the same lineup, the same jingles, the same voices booming through the speakers. It gave the sense of belonging to something larger, an entire generation of children scattered across America, all sitting cross-legged on their carpets at the same time, all laughing at the same animated antics. And when the shows ended, when the cartoons gave way to midday programming, it always carried a certain bittersweet feeling. The magic of the morning slipped away, replaced by the ordinary rhythms of Saturday afternoons. Yet even in that fading moment, there was satisfaction. A belly full of cereal, the memory of heroes saving the day, and jingles that would echo faintly as you played outside or sprawled in your room later that afternoon. Looking back, those mornings were about more than cartoons. They were about community and comfort, about the small rituals that anchored a child's world. The jingles, the cereal mascots, the colorful characters, all of it stitched together into a tapestry of memory that still brings warmth when recalled. Today, the shows may live on through streaming services and old VHS tapes, but the experience of waking early, turning the knob, and being greeted by a Saturday lineup, that belongs to another time. It belongs to the children who believed that good would always triumph by the end of the half hour, who memorized jingles without effort, and who found joy in the simplest of rituals. And as the story of the 1980s continues, we move gently from those cartoon mornings into reflection, toward the humor and wonder of memory itself, and the way these strange, funny, and beloved details remain etched in our hearts. Looking back on the 1980s, it's almost impossible not to smile. So many of the things that once felt ordinary now shimmer in memory as both strange and wonderful. The hairstyles that reached toward the ceiling, the neon clothing that glowed brighter than the sun, the toys and gadgets that seemed so futuristic, but now look almost quaint. All of them have a way of reminding us that every era carries its own sense of humor. At the time, none of it seemed unusual. Stirrup pants, slap bracelets, boombox battles on street corners, these were just the details of daily life. But memory has a way of softening the edges, of turning the awkward into the endearing and the peculiar into something beloved. What once might have made us roll our eyes now makes us laugh quietly to ourselves, grateful that we had the chance to live through it. That is the real gift of nostalgia. It doesn't erase the past, but it transforms it. It allows us to step back into a mall food court filled with teenagers, or to hear the static crackle of rabbit ears on an old television, or to remember the satisfaction of solving a Rubik's Cube, even if, in truth, the stickers had to be peeled off and rearranged. These moments remind us that life was never just about perfection. It was about trying, about playing, about showing up as best as we could. And in remembering, we see the humor that was always hiding there. The oversized shoulder pads that made us feel powerful. The waterbeds that promised luxury, but often delivered backaches. The jingles that lodged themselves in our minds, so catchy that we can still sing them word for word after decades have passed. Each one is a reminder that joy and laughter were stitched into the fabric of everyday life, even when we didn't notice it at the time. As we let these memories drift around us tonight, there is comfort in knowing that their humor doesn't diminish them. If anything, it makes them more precious. Because when we laugh at the past, we are really laughing with it, with the people we once were, and with the friends and families who shared those moments beside us. So let the images linger a little longer. The mall neon glowing, the clatter of roller skates, the soft click of a cassette tape starting to play. Let the sound of those Saturday morning cartoons echo faintly in your mind, the jingles and laughter fading like a lullaby. And let yourself be reminded that these funny, strange, and beloved details are more than curiosities. They are proof of a time when the world felt a little lighter, and when even the silliest things carried their own kind of magic. Now, as this story comes to a close, let your breathing slow with the rhythm of these memories. Imagine the lights of the 1980s dimming one by one, neon signs softening, televisions going quiet, roller rinks falling still, a gentle hush settling over everything. Thank you for joining us tonight, for walking through this colorful decade, and for remembering with us the beauty hidden in its oddities. May these stories keep you company as you drift into sleep, wrapping you in warmth, comfort, and the soft laughter of days gone by. And now, dear listener, it's time to let go of the day. Time to rest. From all of us here at Sleepy Town Radio, we wish you a peaceful night, filled with gentle dreams and calm hearts. Good night. Sleep well.